Great question about eligibility for ADHD specifically. Okay, doesn't child find include suspected ADHD? Even though schools don't diagnose ADHD and Texas requires a doctor to diagnose it, aren't schools supposed to assess for it instead of having parent pay for all the testing? Yes and no, okay? Well, yes, mostly. But let me go ahead and say this. ADHD or other health impairment is an eligibility category. Child find and the child find mandate is when a district knew, suspected, or should have known that the child might have a qualifying disability and be in need of specialized instruction. You got to have both of those components, a qualifying disability and be in need of specialized instruction. That's what gets you eligible. That is not the same standard as the suspicion, though. The suspicion is just if the district knew, suspected, or should have known. And that's the child find mandate. And I don't care if the kid's homeless. I don't care if they're migrant. I don't care if they live under a rock. I don't care if they're homeschooled. If they are within a geographic boundary of that school system, whether they're enrolled or not, the school system has a child find responsibility to locate these children, evaluate them, and if they qualify, then make an offering of FAPE. At that point, just at that point, then if the parent doesn't have the child enrolled, they would need to have a choice whether they would enroll or they would not. But it does not negate the school system's responsibility to locate these children. So if the child's already enrolled in school, and let's say it's suspected that the child has ADHD, but the parents don't know and the parents haven't diagnosed, let's say the teachers think and suspect that that's the case. Well, they're members of the school system. They are employed by the school system. This should be referred over to response intervention or the problem solving team. And then it's perfectly okay for a teacher to talk to the parents and say, hey, I think that there's something going on here. Maybe it's ADHD. That doesn't mean you're a doctor, guys. It just means that you're making a recommendation to the parent. You can't mandate medication. You're not a doctor. You can't diagnose, but you sure as hell can sit there and put things on a parent radar that they hadn't seen before or they might not consider. Now, does the parent need to go out before the referral meeting and the child find process is triggered to go get a magic diagnosis? No. Now, why is that? It's a component. It's a necessary eventuality, okay? But this is what rating scales are for. When there are ADHD rating scales, this is the same requirement for autism spectrum disorder, guys. A diagnosis from a doctor or clinical psychologist is required as an eligibility category and requirement for autism. It's the same way with ADHD and other health impairment. There has to be a diagnosis. But at the same time, in order to get to that point of even saying, hey, we need a diagnosis, this is why we have the precursors of the rating scales, which we have autism rating scales in the form of a GARS, a Gilliam Autism Rating Scale, a CARS. We also have the ADHD scales. The parent can fill them out, and then a couple teachers fill them out. That are best exposed to the child, that knows the child the most. It's a lot easier to accomplish that when the child's in elementary school where they have one consistent or two consistent teachers. It's a little bit more difficult to identify children that in middle school or high school that make a lot of class changes, and especially if they have better mornings and afternoons or vice versa. So it's very important who is selected as a teacher to fill out these rating scales so that we have the best possible reliable results that would indicate whether the child is suspected of having autism or having ADHD. Now, if those scales come back that it is highly suspected that they would be diagnosed as ADHD, then yes, the next step would be a formal diagnosis. Now, does the parent in this process have to be the ones that pay for the medical diagnosis or the psychological evaluation? No. That's what a free, appropriate public education is. And if there's a suspicion that the child may qualify, then at that point, the school system cannot be an obstructionist to that process by claiming that the responsibility falls on the parent. It would fall on the school system, especially if the parents, let's say don't have the resources, don't have the funds to do it. It would fall on the school system to do that and verify that, especially if those precursor rating scales come back indicative that this might be the case. But the answer to the question is it falls on the school system. They are the ones in the child find process, in the location of kids that potentially could qualify and then eventually qualify to go through this thorough evaluation process that would include getting a formal diagnosis.